Greetings from Amsterdam Schiphol Airport, where I am right now. I had to be creative in between two events. This afternoon, I was at XP event in Amsterdam, and tomorrow I have another one near Vienna. So thank God I found a silent room somewhere at an airport. Imagine that. So good to be here. Yeah, I am working on something that I call the unFIX model. And without further ado, let me just explain what that all is about. I begin with showing people a couple of pictures from my hometown, Rotterdam, the Netherlands, which is where I am from. This is one of the most famous buildings. People actually come to my town to see these buildings, the Cube buildings. I had a friend who lived here for a while, and she said, you may not realize it, but I had to vacuum clean the walls by hand because the dust settles on the on the slanted walls. Very odd living spaces, as you can imagine, and there's no Roomba going up the walls yet. So I'm going to show you a couple of pictures, more pictures for Rotterdam in a moment, and I will explain to you the reason why. But first, I've been to a company called Haier in China about 10, 12 years ago. I met Mr. Zhang, the CEO. He actually wrote the foreword for the Chinese translation of my book, Management 3.0. Maybe some people know me from Managing for Happiness and Management 3.0, which I have done in the past. And Haier is an interesting company because at the time they had already reorganized into a network of 3,000 autonomous units. By now there are 4,000 autonomous units. There's a network of micro enterprises, they call it. They literally, Mr. Zhang literally fired all the middle managers and said, either you find a job elsewhere, we can help you with that, or you become the CEO of a micro enterprise. And they are now called the world's most creatively managed company by Gary Hamel, and the world's largest home appliance brand because they make vacuum cleaners and refrigerators and things like that. But I'm very much inspired by a company like that because they're a network. They do not have a matrix structure. They do not have 17 layers of management and so on. And they're super, super adaptable and versatile, as I call it. And they are the answer basically to this question in this book by Jay Galbraith on organization design. Every company wants to change as quickly as its business environment does. Otherwise, it's falling behind. So why not design organizations to be constantly changeable? Well, Haier has done just that. For example, they were the first to help the Chinese government mass producing masks, face masks in COVID times. Haier could do that because they could respond so incredibly fast. Within no time, they had factories up and running, producing masks for half the country. That's how fast they can respond as a network. Now, coming back to a couple of pictures on buildings, I'm inspired by this book, Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander. Maybe some of you know this book, actually. It contains 253 patterns on city planning and urban architecture. So, for example, one pattern is the public square. I'm pretty sure you know what a public square is. A squarish place in town where roads converge, and then sometimes there's trees and benches and cafes popping up around the square. Every city has town squares or public squares. And this is a picture of my hometown in Rotterdam in front of the central station. I think this counts as a public square. I think it's an awesome building, so I like showing off there a little bit. Another picture of a promenade. That's another pattern in that book of a pattern language. The promenade is a street that is nice to walk with some activities along the way so that people meet each other, and there could be shops or something. Turns out that the promenade in my town is called the Langbaan, and is actually the first pedestrian-only car-free shopping street in the world, according to Wikipedia. And it has been replicated since then across many cities, at least here in Europe. We have many cities with pedestrian-only shopping streets. So that's a pattern that has been copied by other towns. Last example, the children's way. That is the pattern of allowing children to get through the city without crossing busy streets. So make tunnels, make pedestrian bridges and things like that. I cheated here because this is the Market Hall in Rotterdam. I think it's just an amazing building. So I think I'm allowed a little bit of chauvinism when it comes to architecture. But the point is, this is a pattern language. And a pattern language is a coherent set of micro solutions that can be used in many ways depending on context. So lots of cities, I think maybe all cities, have public squares. Nearly all of them have promenades. I hope many of them have children's ways, but the combinations are always different because Rotterdam is not Amsterdam, is not London, is not New York City, is not Chicago, and so on. They're all different cities with different contexts, different constraints, but the patterns, the individual patterns are replicable. So that is the idea of a pattern language. The concept has also been picked up in the 90s in this book, Design Patterns by the famous Gang of Four. I'm sure some participants here in this call know what I'm talking about when I refer to the singleton, the model view controller, the facade pattern. There are 23 patterns, if I remember well, in this book. And these were patterns for technical architecture. Interestingly enough, back then already in the 90s, some people took that book and turned the pattern library into frameworks so that you could literally install all the 23 patterns in .NET or in Java or whatever. And I thought, and other people agree with me, that that was not the point of the book. It was not the point of installing all the patterns on your computer. The idea is that you only pick the ones that you need in the architecture that you're creating. So I like the idea of patterns. I like the idea of a pattern language, offering people choice and say, well, these are options. You pick the options that make sense to you, but you have to recombine them in your own way. And I try to do that with organization design and ways of working. So because I want to be inspired, as I said, by hire, create, help companies be more as a network instead of a matrix, and then I find the patterns and offer these to people. And the first pattern that I found that I think is very important is what I call the base. Some people call it the tribe or the clan or the business unit. I don't care what you use. In the Spotify model, they use the word tribe, but some people complain about cultural appropriation and things like that. So I think the word base is pretty safe. So the base is your home, where you feel you belong, where you feel psychological safety. And to give you an example of a company that did not have bases or tribes, a company 20 years ago where I worked as a programmer, .NET programmer, and my brain was rented out to clients to do programming. I was on a team with 3 other people, and I knew my teammates pretty well, and we tried to do a good job, and I loved my team and so on. But I didn't know anyone from the company that sent me to that client. I only knew my manager because he decided how high my salary was. And I knew the HR person because she paid my salary. And those were the only 2 people that I knew out of the 4,000. So I had no connection whatsoever with the company other than that the name was on the slip, the salary slip that I got once per month. So I quit within 1 year. I couldn't care less about that business. And I think they lacked the pattern of the base, the tribe, where people love hanging out with their peers and feel trusted and safe. And actually, this is the level at which traditional Agile, according to the Agile Manifesto, works, because the Agile Manifesto, as created at the time, was never intended to scale to 100,000 people, because people do not feel psychologically safe among 100,000. The brain is not equipped to deal with so many people. It scales up to 100, maybe 150. Some people refer to Dunbar's number, for example, as the max size, where trust and respect and safety, etc., can work, where you don't need agreements with each other. So that is my suggested size for the base. Make it no larger than 100, preferably even less. Now, within the base, you're probably going to need teams. I personally do not like the word team anymore. Literally this morning on a podcast, I heard someone refer to their company of 15,000 people as a team. And I thought, that's not a team. That's an enterprise, in my opinion. So the word team has suffered significant dilution, in my opinion. I like the word crew, because it has still more its original meaning of a small team on a mission with a defined goal. So in the pattern language of the unFIX model, I use the word crew. But hey, you use the word team or squad or whatever you prefer. And then I was very happy to find that the guys of Team Topologies already identified 4 patterns, 4 team types that I could simply borrow with credits of where I got them from. The first one, the stream-aligned team, is your average Scrum team, Kanban team, or whatever it is that you're doing, the end-to-end value stream team. Been there, done that. The whole Agile community knows how that works. So those are the yellow ones. In Team Topologies, I borrow the same color, I make them yellow, and say these are the value stream crews, because I like the word crew, but there's no difference basically. It becomes interesting when we look at the 3 exceptions to the rules. Hopefully many of your teams are the yellow ones, but an enterprise of 100,000 people is not just 20,000 Scrum teams. You need a bit more to make it all fit together and to connect everything. So one exception is the enabling team in Team Topologies. I call them the facilitation crew, but I mean practically the same thing. It is those people who help those Agile teams, the Scrum teams, to get started, to get going. And the idea is that this is a temporary arrangement. They should be able to do this themselves. So in Team Topologies, they say that there should not be a permanent dependency on an enabling team. And I agree with that. However, I do allow exceptions. I have a spouse and he has a personal trainer. I can tell you, when the personal trainer is on vacation, no exercise happens whatsoever. And then I tell him, hey, you could go for a run or something. And they say, no, I'll wait for the PT to come back next week. Okay, whatever. I know some Agile teams have a similar attitude. They just like their Agile coach. They just appreciate their Scrum Master, and that's like their personal trainer. And that person helps them raise the bar and get better and go through the motions with the retros and so on. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, with a semi-permanent relationship with such a facilitation crew. So we call them facilitation crews. They're the purple ones, and they go across in the visual presentation of the unFIX model. And then the third one I borrowed from Team Topologies is the capability crew. They actually call it a complicated subsystem team. I don't like that word. It is a term that is itself complicated. I do agree with Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pais that they say component teams are usually bad. You don't want a dependency on a component team in Agile business. However, the exception is when that component team or subsystem team handles something very complicated that requires unique skills or expertise. imagine cybersecurity skills or machine learning or whatever. You're glad to have 2 people and you have 10 agile teams. It is impossible to teach those 10 agile teams all those cybersecurity skills or whatever it is. That is a rare capability. So you just deal with the fact that you do have, in some cases, this dependency on a few people with rare skills. And then I say, well, then the bottleneck is actually not the subsystem. It's not the component. It is the capability of those people. It is their expertise. That is the bottleneck. So that's why I call this the capability crew. And I hope you don't need them, but sometimes, and maybe that's why they are red, sort of the red flag, sometimes you cannot escape this pattern. And then you should just deal with it and have these people go around, help the other teams where necessary. And they're not going to teach everyone their skills, because that is just cognitive overload for everyone else. The last one I borrowed from team topologies is the platform crew, the platform team. The book usually refers to IT-based services with, literally they use the word API, DevOps kind of services or infrastructure that is offered by platform teams. I understand that. However, they could also be human services. My favorite example is a company in Poland where I was a couple of years ago, and they had kindergarten on site, a nursery. So in the morning, there was a young company, 100 or more people with lots of young people with kids, babies, toddlers, and so on. So they could bring them to the office, dump them in the basement, and then by the end of the day, there was this implicit contract that they will be healthy and alive, and you could take them back home. That's an API as well. It's a human API. Give us your kids, we'll take care of them so you can focus on offering value to customers. So the green ones, the platform crews, are at the bottom. It doesn't stop there. I had 14 types borrowed from team topologies, but I found that a few are missing, in my opinion. One is deals with the experience of our users. I read this quote in this book, Networked, Scale, and Agile. There are examples abound of the crippling effects of agile business units that cannot work together to deliver a complete customer experience at the enterprise level. And I have plenty of examples of that. I often share my story of my smartphone that I used, that I bought a year ago, where I had to re-authenticate on my banking app, and it insisted that I had to change my password on the website. Then the website insisted that I validate that with the app. So the app sent me to the website, and the website sent me to the app, and I was stuck for half an hour. I call those islands of agility. The app was fine and the website was fine, but the user experience still sucked because I was in the middle, drowning between the islands of agility. That is an example of the entire user experience not working. And this book suggests that sometimes you need a team specializing in the user the user experience through user experience mapping, design thinking, data analysis, and so on. They're not the same people as the product owners. I'll give you an example of that later on. But people who have with a laser focus on what is happening with our users and customers, and then informing the product owners or product managers or whatever the kind of people you work with, what should be added to the backlog because of the stuff they found that does not work across the many touch points of a company. And then I'm a person who likes balance and symmetry in pictures. So I thought then I also want a similar one on the other side for the vendors, the partners, the gig workers, the freelancers, and so on, that we perhaps depend on. This airport where I am now in Amsterdam, Schiphol Airport, was a complete disaster after COVID, because the lines were 4 hours long when the customers returned after COVID, and there was no personnel anymore to handle them because the baggage handlers, the security people, they had all left because they had been on 0-hour contracts. So they said, goodbye, we're going somewhere else. And they didn't come back because the airport paid them so little. And then customers were suffering because the vendors had been mistreated. That is something that you need to perhaps think about. How can we offer our partners and so on a decent experience? Last but not least, this is my work on Management 3.0 shining through. Where do we put the managers? Up there in the governance crew. I call them the chiefs, and the managers should be only there and nowhere else, basically. Stay out of every team, because as soon as you have a manager on any of the other teams, then you just created a territory, and that makes you difficult to reorganize. So no managers on any team except they're in the blue box, the governance crew. Now, this was all about teams, and in network science, I would call them the strong ties, the people who work with each other on a daily basis, who know each other well, etc. But anyone familiar with network theory knows that strong ties have to be balanced with weak ties, the long distances across the social network, the hubs versus the spokes, you could say. That's what guilds are for. I call them forums in unFIX model, because with the word guild, usually people assume that this is something bottom up, that this is self-organized, and that's completely fine. But centers of excellence could also be, those are also forums, and they are often more top-down installed, where managers say, we want people to align on this topic across the organization and go self-organize, but make sure you align on something. Very often people think in terms of job types for guilds and forums, like a guild for UX design, or a forum for Java or Python programming or whatever. But that doesn't have to be only technology or functions. For example, you could have a forum around a region, a forum for business in China. Who was interested in talking about doing business in China? It's good to get together across the enterprise around that topic. Or seasonal, what do we do for Christmas across the enterprise? Any things to coordinate and align in our Christmas preparations, maybe an April Fool's forum in March to prepare the pranks that we're going to play on our customers and the media and so on. You could create a forum for anything. And this is these are the, as I said, the weak ties in the social network. And I find that actually just as important as the crews, because the strong ties and the weak ties, they play both significant roles in networks. So if you want to become a network organization, you should not just focus 99% of your attention on the teams and then have 1% of your time spent on how do we organize things across guilds. They need to be a lot more important if you want to go the network way. 15 minutes left. I have a couple of things still to share. Lots of other patterns that I'm collecting. For example, I have a pattern on a pattern set on this decision methods, because some methods suggest that you make decisions in consent-based decision-making. Holacracy and Sociocracy suggest to use a consent-based decision-making. Well, that is fine. That means that you can do what you want as long as nobody says objection or veto. But I found 15 other decision-making methods, basically. Sometimes you want unanimity, sometimes you want fist to five, sometimes you want dot voting, sometimes you want a supermajority. There should be choice. So what my job, I see myself as the one that has the job of offering people the options and then let you work it out. What choice do I make in which context? All right, let's move on with reteaming, because I think that's a super interesting topic. Sometimes teams have to be formed fast. And for example, that could be something happening here in Amsterdam city center, needs to be on the news tonight. So we send a crew consisting of a camera person and a sound engineer and an interviewer, and off they go. They have to create a news item for TV, deliver it within a few hours to the editors. I can tell you one thing, these three people do not have time for trust exercises. They will not have time to create a team agreement with a name and so on. They just have to hit the ground running and get working. That's what professionals do. Also in fire departments, also in hospitals, they don't have time for forming, storming, norming, performing, and all that stuff. Actually, this should be done at different levels. The fire department personnel already knows how to work with each other. They have practiced that before they form teams to solve a problem somewhere. This is discussed in this book, Dynamic Reteaming by Heidi Helfand. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the book. Heidi says that actually static teams are not really agile because there are so many things happening in the environment, risks and opportunities that we need to respond to. It should be a skill to develop to do reteaming faster. And I agree with that, not only because of the environmental demands on the business, but also because it can simply be a better employee experience to be able to move around and choose different teams to work on for a while. It could be better for how people perceive their experience with the company. I'm very much inspired by this quote by Martin Fowler. He said, if it hurts, do it more often. And he mentioned that very often, referring to software releases, of course. I'm so old that I remember releasing software on discs and then CDs. And for some who have lived at that age, we know how difficult that was when you found a bug fix the very next day after you sent out, or you found a bug after you sent out the CDs to all your clients. Then you had to do a bug fix release, and oh my God, that was so painful. And then these agilists came in and said, well, if it hurts, why don't you do it more often? Because then you figure out how to make it easier if you do it more often. That was the whole point of doing it more often. And then I've been part of the Agile community for 15 years or something. And I've always nodded my head when I was in the audience when speakers said, don't change your team, keep your team together, because if you change your team structure, you are going to hurt velocity and you're going to hurt throughput. Well, if it hurts, maybe we should do it more often. Maybe keeping the teams together is not dealing with the real problem, which is you don't know how to do reteaming, which is something they have already learned to do in other industries. It's not a new thing. So let's have a quick look at the possibilities here, because I want to give people options. I'm not telling that you should do reteaming. I'm just offering the possibilities, and then you work it out. So there are two dimensions in this picture. The vertical one is how long do teams live, and horizontally is do people move in and out. So the steady team is the default, you could say, in the Agile community. Long-lived teams, nobody going in and out. So that's no permeability, basically, or team members change rarely, and they stay together for a long time. I'm totally fine with that in many contexts, but it is not the only way. Redgate Software has published a number of blog posts on how they do reteaming on an annual basis. That is more the dynamic team to the other side. So the teams are long-lived, but people move in and out, because once per year they can choose to go to another team, and that is all self-organized. They sign up with their first choice, second choice, and so on. And then there's a ritual about that, and people are very happy that they have that option. It adds to the employee experience, and for sure they can see that velocity drops a little bit, but customers don't even notice. But the win for developers is much higher than that small loss that they have once per year. At the bottom, we find the short-lived teams. One type is the mission teams. Those are the short-lived teams that do not change during their mission. Think a flight crew. A crew on an airplane, the ones that are going to bring me to Vienna later tonight. They stick together for the short duration that they are a team. It is not of advice to do reteaming mid-flight. That doesn't really work well. So same crew from start to end. At Tesla, they do reteaming every 3 hours. Imagine that every 3 hours they form different teams, and it's all self-organized. People sign up to the tasks they want to do, and then they call people in and say, hey, do you want to work with me on this, on that, and so on. Joe Justice does keynotes on that topic of him working at Tesla for a year. And then the last one example is the liquid team. That is a short duration team, a short-lived team, where people also move in and out. Think the construction crew that worked on my house last year when they had to change all the window paints. Every morning I was making coffee for a different crew because there were specialists going in and out all the time. I had no idea who I was making coffee for every morning, but there was always a crew. They knew each other. They were always singing to the music and so on. That works in that industry. And I'm not the person to say this option is best. I want to know what are the options so that I can pick the ones that suit my context. I'll give you one example. Pipedrive is a company that reached out to me. They're based in Estonia. They're a SaaS platform for the CRM, customer relationship management tool. And they said, hey, that stuff that you publish on the unFIX model, we do that. We actually have similar patterns. And they're not the only ones, by the way. And it turns out that Pipedrive has a number of tribes. I call them bases, but same thing. Each one has an engineering manager. That will be the governance crew of one person. It's fine. And then they have a couple of value stream crews of two types. One is the launch pad at the bottom. They only do maintenance stuff and small bug fixes and small improvements on the thing that the tribe is responsible for. And then they have separate mission teams, short duration of a couple of weeks, couple of months maximum, that build new features, minimal marketable features, for example. And the interesting thing is there's a continuous rotation between the launchpad and the mission teams. So if you've been on a launchpad for too long, you're expected to go on a next mission. And if you've been on a mission 2 or 3 times, you're expected to go back to a launchpad. So within one tribe, they still adhere to the principle of you build it, you own it. Only they make a separation between building things on mission teams and then owning it on the launch pad. You can focus. For a while, you're only building new stuff and you can not bother with the owning stuff, the maintenance, because that's your friends and the tribe take care of that. But you know that half a year later, you will be doing their job and they will have yours. So it's rotating continuously. That means that Pipedrive has combined the dynamic team with the mission teams. The Launchpad is a dynamic team. It's long-lived, but people come in and out all the time. While the mission teams, well, the name itself explains it already. They're on a mission for a new feature, and they move people between the two. They don't have steady teams. The interesting thing is they came up with this. They call this literally the Pipedrive Agile Framework. They created it a couple of years ago. They made this to increase the employee experience. This was not externally driven, this was internally driven because Estonia is a small market with a couple of unicorn companies. So they were basically buying each other's best engineers. That's a race to the bottom. They said, we need to be the best company to stay so that they don't go away. And then they asked the developers, what kind of experience would you like? And they wanted to be able to choose what to work on. They wanted to separate maintenance versus new stuff. And so this framework emerged out of that, and the people there loved it. And that's a nice example of having the box of options and then choosing the ones that fit your context. So, going to summarize things, I think organizations design should be like this, like Lego. I'm a Lego fan. I'm sure some of you are Lego fans here as well on this call, that's a box of options. Basically, you can build anything you want out of the box. It is an options list. It is not a shopping list. You're not supposed to do everything in the box. Did you know that Lego offers 4,000 different types of Lego blocks? 4,000. I don't even know what types they are, but it doesn't matter, because the more options you have, the more things you can build. But you don't start with putting 4,000 types on the table and try to build something out of all 4,000. That makes no sense. Any child or adult playing with Lego understands that you don't need to use all of them. You just pick the ones that fit your problem. Now, some people ask me, where is this already implemented, Jurgen? It sometimes drives me nuts, to be honest. Because nobody asked that question of Christopher Alexander's book, A Pattern Language. Cities already existed before he published the book with patterns in cities. He simply observed which patterns work and gave them a name and a number. I do the same thing. I just see what works in companies or frameworks, and I identify the individual patterns. I give it a name and a number, and that's it. So you're not supposed to implement the unFIX model. No, you're supposed to just be inspired by the patterns and implement individual ones. But we can help with that. The unFIX community we have online, we have a template, Miro template, and PowerPoint a template, and so on. And there's case studies. For example, I went to the second largest web shop in the Netherlands, Coolblue, to look at what they're doing. They have a net promoter score of 67, which is very, very high. So I thought, I need to know what they're doing to be so well appreciated. I'm a big fan of this company, by the way. I buy a lot of stuff at this company. And well, you know, I found lots of patterns that I had already described with the unFIX model. They have value stream crews, they have the facilitation crews, they have experience crew. The pink one, they call them business analysts and customer journey experts and so on. And you see, they're not the same people as the product owners. They're people specializing in the experience, which is probably why they have a net promoter score of 67. And they have guilds, domains, I would call them forums and bases, but it's the same pattern. The language is irrelevant, how you call it yourself in your own company. The pattern usage is the same Lego blocks, basically, that they've used. Another case study was published just yesterday of a bank, an insurance company in Switzerland. They have already been playing with patterns, individual patterns, and then they discovered the unFIX model and said, well, we were actually already doing that, but it makes it easier because now we have a language and visuals that makes it easier for us to discuss what we are doing. And that exactly is what I hope to achieve, that make it easier for people to talk, because I offer language with patterns. That's what a pattern language is supposed to do, and not much more. You will have to do the rebuilding with the cards and the patterns and combine the patterns in any way you like that makes sense in your context. So I hope that this explains that this is not a framework. That is actually what the word unFIX is about. It is the unframework for innovative experiences. That is how the name emerged. And I like it because it helps people to unFIX everything and make things more flexible in their organization. Be more like a network and less like a matrix or a hierarchy, because those structures have proven to be somewhat problematic. So I hope this was inspiring for some of you, and I look forward to answering some questions if you have any.